I came home on a Thursday night. I wasn't supposed to be back until Friday. The flight out of Denver got rerouted. I caught an earlier connection. And by 9 o'clock, I was pulling into my own driveway with my bag still on my shoulder and my keys already in my hand. I didn't call ahead. I figured I'd surprise Carol. Maybe she'd smile that way she does when something catches her off guard, that quiet, relieved smile she's had since we brought Daniel home from the hospital 4 months ago. I was looking forward to that smile. I'd been looking forward to it for 6 days. I did not get that smile. What I got instead was this. I walked through my front door, set my bag down in the entryway, and heard Daniel crying from somewhere in the back of the house. That wasn't unusual. A 4-month-old cries. I know that. But then I walked into the kitchen, and I stopped moving entirely. Carol was standing at the stove. One arm was stirring a pot of something. The other arm was holding our son against her chest. Her hair was unwashed. Her eyes were red at the edges. She was wearing the same gray shirt she'd been wearing in the photo she sent me 2 days earlier. And Daniel was wailing, the way babies wail when they're not just hungry but something is actually wrong. I said, "Hey." She turned around and I could see it on her face immediately. Not the surprise, not the relieved smile. Just exhaustion, the deep kind. The kind that goes past tired and becomes something close to empty. She said, "You're home." And that was it. 2 words. Like she didn't have enough left in her to say anything more. I looked at her. I looked at Daniel. I took 2 steps and took him out of her arms and said, "How long has he been like this?" She said, "Since yesterday morning." I said, "Is he running a fever?" She said, 101. "I've been alternating the Tylenol and the Motrin," like the nurse said. I held him against my shoulder and I looked at my wife and I said, "Where's Ruth? Where's Kevin?" And Carol just looked at me. She looked at me for a long moment, and then she looked at the ceiling, and then she looked back at me, and she said, very quietly, "Living room." Friends, I want you to understand something before I tell you what I saw when I walked into that living room. I need you to understand the full picture, because when I tell you, you might think I'm exaggerating. I promise you, I am not. My mother, Ruth, 71 years old, healthy, mobile, sharp as she's ever been, was in my recliner. She had the television on. She had a cup of tea on the side table. She was watching one of those real estate shows, the ones where couples tour 3 houses and pick one. My brother Kevin, 48 years old, been living with me for the past 5 months after his second divorce, which I will get to, was on my couch. Laptop open. Earbuds in. He was watching something on YouTube. I could see the little white cords going up into his ears. Daniel was screaming. Not in the next room. Not upstairs. You could hear him from the kitchen, which meant you could absolutely hear him in the living room. You could hear him standing in the driveway. Neither of them looked up when I walked in. I stood there for a moment. I was still holding my son, who was burning with fever and crying against my neck. My wife was in the kitchen, alone, as she apparently had been all day. And the 2 adults I had allowed to live under my roof were sitting 10 feet from each other, doing absolutely nothing. I said, "How long has the baby been sick?" My mother looked up. She said, "Oh, you're home early." Like that was the relevant information. Like that was what mattered. I said, "Mom, how long has Daniel been sick?" She said, "Since yesterday, I think. Carol's been handling it." I said, "Carol's been handling it." She said, "She's his mother." I looked at Kevin. He had pulled one earbud out. He said, "Hey man, how was the trip?" I want to tell you that I said something then. Something firm, something direct, something that made it clear to both of them exactly what I thought of what I had just walked into. But I didn't. Not yet. Because I was holding a sick baby and my wife needed help, and I made a decision in that moment that the next hour was going to be about Carol and Daniel, and everything else was going to wait. I went back to the kitchen. I told Carol to sit down. I took over at the stove with one hand and held Daniel with the other until Carol had eaten something, which, it turned out, she hadn't done since breakfast. I got her to eat half a bowl of soup. I checked Daniel's temperature again. 100.2. We called the nurse line. They said to watch him through the night, keep alternating the medication, bring him in if it went above 103. Carol fell asleep on the couch at 9:30 with Daniel on her chest. I sat in the chair across from her and watched them breathe, and I thought about the past 5 months. Kevin had moved in at the end of January. His marriage to Sandra had fallen apart. I won't go into all of it, but Kevin has a way of making things about Kevin that tends to wear people down over time. He needed a place to stay. I said, fine, 3 months, just until he got back on his feet. My mother had come out to help when Daniel was born in February, and then she just didn't leave. She said she wanted to be close to the baby. She said Carol needed support. I believed her. I thought I was lucky to have family close by. What I did not understand, and what I was starting to understand now, was that support meant something different to my mother than it did to me. To me, support meant helping, doing dishes, taking the baby for an hour so Carol could sleep, making dinner sometimes, being useful. To my mother, apparently, support meant being present, being in the building, being available in theory, if never quite in practice. And Kevin had been looking for work for 5 months. He'd applied for 3 jobs that I knew of. He went out most evenings. He slept until 10. He ate everything Carol cooked and left his dishes in the sink. I knew some of this. I had seen pieces of it when I was home. But I traveled 4 days a week for work, and when you're only home 3 days, you tend to see the surface of things. You see the house standing. You see people getting along, or at least not fighting. You don't see your wife doing everything, every single day, while 2 fully capable adults treat her like the help. I hadn't seen it clearly until I walked in that Thursday night. I sat in that chair until midnight, watching Carol and Daniel sleep, and I made some decisions. The next morning, I got up early. I made coffee. I took Daniel so Carol could sleep in. And when my mother came downstairs at 8 and Kevin came shuffling out at 10:15, I sat them both down at the kitchen table. I said, I want to talk to you both. My mother said, is everything okay? Is the baby okay? I said, Daniel is doing better. Thank you. And no, everything is not okay. And then this part matters, friends, because I know some of you are thinking the same thing you were probably thinking a few minutes ago, which is that I should have said this months ago, and you are right, and I'm going to get to that. I told them exactly what I had walked into the night before, not with anger, not yelling, just facts. I said, my wife was standing in this kitchen with a sick baby in her arms, making dinner, and the 2 of you were 15 feet away doing nothing. My mother started to say something and I held up my hand. I said, I'm not finished. She closed her mouth. I said, I've been home for 12 hours. In those 12 hours, I have not seen either of you offer to hold Daniel, offer to make a meal, offer to do a single dish, or ask Carol if she needed anything. And I have to believe that's not specific to last night. I have to believe that's been the pattern, because I can see what that pattern has done to my wife, and I am not willing to watch it continue. Kevin said, hey, I help out. I looked at him. I said, Kevin, when was the last time you cooked a meal in this house? He didn't answer. I said, when was the last time you did a load of laundry that wasn't your own? Nothing. I said, when was the last time you got up in the night with the baby so Carol could sleep? He looked at the table. I said, you are my brother and I love you, but you have been here for 5 months and you have been a guest, not a member of this household. That ends today. My mother said, I think you're being a little dramatic, sweetheart. Carol hasn't complained. And that right there, that is the sentence I want you to hold on to, because that is the sentence that changed everything for me in that moment. I said, Mom, do you understand how much energy it takes to complain when you're running on empty? Do you understand that when a person has been doing everything by themselves for months, they don't have enough left over to also advocate for themselves? She hasn't complained because she's exhausted. That is not the same as everything being fine. My mother looked at me. She said, I came here to help. I said, I know you did, and I think you believe that, but I need you to look at what helping has actually looked like, and I need you to be honest with yourself about the answer. She didn't say anything. I said, here's what's going to change. Kevin, I need you to be actively useful in this house. Meals, dishes, yard work, whatever needs doing. And I need to see a real job search applications, interviews, a plan with a timeline. I'll give you until the 1st of next month. If we're not seeing movement by then, we need to talk about a different arrangement. Kevin nodded. He didn't look happy about it, but he nodded. I said, Mom, I love you. I want you to be part of Daniel's life, but I need you to be a grandmother and a helper. not a guest. If you're here, you're part of this household. That means pitching in. Every day. She said, I can't believe you're speaking to me like this. I said, I'm speaking to you like this because I should have said it 3 months ago. And I didn't. And my wife paid the price for my silence. I'm not going to let that continue. Here's the part I haven't told you yet, friends. The part I was ashamed of then, and I'm still a little ashamed of now. I didn't tell Carol I was having this conversation. I told her I was going to talk to them, but I didn't tell her what I was going to say or what I was asking them to change. And I did that because I thought I was protecting her. I thought if she heard me lay it all out, it would be awkward. It would cause tension. She'd feel caught in the middle. What I was actually doing was making a decision about her life without including her in it. And when she came downstairs that morning and found us all sitting at the kitchen table with coffee cups and tight faces, and I had to explain to her after the fact what I'd said, I saw something on her face that wasn't gratitude. She said, I appreciate you doing that, I do. And then she said, I just wish you'd talk to me first. That stung. It should have stung, because she was right. So after my mother went upstairs and Kevin went out to run errands, I sat down with Carol and I did something I should have done months ago. I asked her to tell me everything. Not the summarized version, not the highlights, everything. What it had actually been like. Day by day. She talked for 45 minutes. I did not interrupt. She told me about the first week home from the hospital, when Daniel wasn't latching and she was crying every 3 hours and my mother kept offering opinions about what she was doing wrong. She told me about Kevin eating the dinner she'd prepped for the week because he'd figured it was up for grabs. She told me about the night Daniel had a rough stretch and she was up from 2 a.m. to 6. And when she came downstairs in the morning, Kevin and my mother were eating breakfast and watching television like it was a vacation. She said, I kept waiting for it to get better. I kept thinking they'll settle in, they'll start helping, it'll even out. And then it just never did. I said, why didn't you tell me? She said, because I knew you'd feel caught between me and your family. And I didn't want to be the wife who made you choose. Friends, if you are listening to this and you are the person in this relationship who is trying not to make them choose, please hear me when I say this. Your suffering is not the price of keeping the peace. You are allowed to say it's too hard. You are allowed to say, I need more. You are supposed to be able to say that to the person who married you. I told Carol exactly what I was doing from there on out. Not presenting her with decisions afterward, with her ahead of time. We agreed together on what we needed the next 30 days to look like, and we agreed together on what we would do if it didn't. The first 2 weeks after that conversation, things were better. Kevin cooked dinner twice. He mowed the lawn. He went to 2 interviews. My mother held Daniel in the evenings and did the dishes after meals without being asked. It felt like maybe it had worked. Like maybe the conversation had been enough. It hadn't been enough. Week 3, Kevin stopped cooking. He missed a 3rd interview because he slept through the alarm. My mother started making small comments again, nothing dramatic, nothing you could point to directly, but the kind of comments that add up. Carol, are you sure you should be feeding him that way? Carol, you know, in my day, we didn't make such a fuss. Little things, constant things, the kind of thing that on its own is nothing and in aggregate is everything. And I was home that week. I heard them. I did not let them pass. The first time my mother said something, I said, Mom, Carol's doing a great job. Let's leave it there. She looked surprised. She said, I was just saying. I said, I know what you were saying. Let's leave it there. The second time I said, Mom, we've talked about this. She stopped. Kevin, I handled differently. I sat down with him one evening and I said, I need you to show me your job search. Emails, applications, responses show me where you are. He said, I've been looking. I said, I know you've been looking. I want to see it. He pulled up his laptop. There were 4 applications over 3 weeks. 2 of them had been sent the same day, which I'm fairly certain was the day after our kitchen conversation. I said, Kevin, this is not what we agreed to. He said, the job market's tough right now. I said, the job market is tough. And you are 48 years old with 20 years of experience in logistics. The job market is not why there are 4 applications in 3 weeks. He said, I feel like you're coming at me. I said, I'm coming at you because I care about you and because this is not working. And I told you a month ago what would happen if it wasn't working. He said, you'd kick me out? Your own brother? I said, I'm asking you to take your life seriously. There's a difference. He didn't have a response to that. I gave it one more week. One more week of my mother's small comments, which had reduced but not stopped. One more week of Kevin's half-hearted effort. One more week of coming home in the evenings to a house that felt like it was held together with tension and politeness, and Carol doing slightly less than everything instead of everything, which was progress but was not enough. And then on a Sunday afternoon, Carol and I sat down together, this time, and we made the decision. And then I went and told them. I said, I need you both to make arrangements to move out. I'm giving you 30 days. That's plenty of time to make a plan, and I'll help with whatever I can to make that transition easier. But 30 days from today, this arrangement ends. My mother cried. I expected that. I held her hand and I let her cry, and I did not take back what I said. Kevin said, I can't afford my own place right now. I said, I know. That's why I said I'd help. We can talk about options. But this specific arrangement in this house is done. He said, what does Carol think about this? I said, Carol and I made this decision together. He looked at Carol. She looked back at him. She didn't say anything. She didn't have to. Friends, I want to tell you where we are now, because I know that's what you're waiting for. My mother moved in with my sister Linda out in Tucson. It wasn't easy. There were phone calls. There were guilt trips. There was a week where she wasn't speaking to me, and that hurt, because she is my mother and I love her. But Linda has more space and a slower pace of life, and my mother has settled in there in a way that I think is genuinely better for everyone. She FaceTimes us twice a week to see Daniel. Last month, she called Carol just to talk. That was the first time she'd done that. Kevin found a room in a shared house about 12 minutes from us. He's working now logistics coordinator for a mid-sized shipping company. He started 5 weeks ago. He came over for dinner last Sunday, and he brought a bottle of wine, and he said, I think I needed someone to stop letting me coast. He didn't apologize in so many words, but that was close enough. And Carol, my Carol, she slept in on a Saturday for the first time since before Daniel was born. I brought her coffee in bed, and she looked at me for a long moment, and she said, I feel like I can breathe. I have been married for 19 years. I have heard my wife say a lot of things. I don't think anything she has ever said has mattered to me more than those 5 words. Here is what I know now that I wish I had understood earlier. Keeping the peace in your home is not the same as having peace in your home. I spent months telling myself things were fine because nobody was yelling, because the surface looked okay, because I didn't want to see what was underneath. And the whole time, my wife was holding everything together with both hands and never once asking me to notice. The hardest thing I did was not the conversation with my mother. It was not the ultimatum with Kevin. The hardest thing I did was sit across from Carol after 12 hours home and say, tell me everything, and actually listen, actually hear it. If you are listening to this, and you are the one in the house doing everything, I want you to know that your exhaustion is real, and your need is valid, and you are not asking for too much when you ask for help from the people you have opened your home. You are asking for exactly enough. And if you are the one who has been away, or looked away, or told yourself things were probably fine, start there. Just ask. And then stop talking and listen to the answer. That's the part I got wrong first. That's the part I finally got right. Sometimes the most important thing we can do for the people we love isn't grand or dramatic. It's simply sitting down, looking them in the eyes, and saying, tell me everything. Then actually listening. When we stop managing the surface of our lives and start paying attention to what's underneath, we give the people we love the most powerful gift there is, the feeling that they are truly seen. That's where real peace begins. A small note for you, this story was created and fictionalized by AI, crafted to bring you a moment of meaningful entertainment while sharing a life lesson we hope stays with you long after the last word.